One morning not so long ago, a little girl, Ella Ruth, had a bad tummy ache. The doctor had given her some medicine. She said, "Why does medicine taste so bad if it's going to make us well?" Well, her father said, "That's a question you should ask Grandpa. Get some rest and you'll be feeling better when he gets here." So Ella took a nap and woke up when Grandpa arrived. He asked her how she was feeling. She looked up at him and said, "Grandpa, why is my medicine so yucky if it's going to make me well?" Grandpa looked thoughtful. Some things that look or taste or smell wonderful are really awful. But sometimes things that seem terrible are actually very good. I even remember a story in which both of these strange things were true. Would you like to hear it? "Oh, yes," Ella said. So Grandpa sat down and Ella snuggled up close beside him. Grandpa began, "Once upon a time, there was a great king. He was called the King of Life because he had the power to make anything, even living things like plants and animals and people. The king made a beautiful park filled with trees, streams, lakes, and meadows. And every day the king came to the park and visited the people he had made. They were very happy as they walked together in the beauty of the park. In the center of the park, the king placed a fountain, and up bubbled beautiful water that looked cool and sweet. But the king told his people, 'You may drink from all the streams in the park, but you may not drink from this fountain. The water in this fountain will harm you.' At first, they didn't even go close to the fountain, but they wondered why he didn't want them to drink the water. One day, a stranger in a long black cloak appeared in the park. He told the people that the water in the fountain wasn't bad at all. He said that if they would try it, it would make them as great as the king himself. By now, the people were very curious about the water. Didn't seem fair that the king wouldn't let them drink from the fountain. The stranger filled a cup with the water and gave it to the people, and they drank it. But a terrible thing happened when the people drank the water. Their hearts turned to stone. After that, they no longer felt any love for their king. They didn't even want to be with him anymore. Instead, they built the city of man. The King of Life knew that because of the people's terrible violation of his command, he would be justified in destroying their city. But the king still loved his people. The king was very wise and had known that the people would drink from the fountain, and he already had a plan to help them. He went to his son and said to him, "I want you to help heal our subjects." Ella stopped Grandpa and asked, "What did the king want the prince to do?" "Oh, it was an awful task," Grandpa said. "The king gave the prince a golden cup and told him to go to the city of man. There the prince would find another fountain, but this fountain was not filled with sweet water. It was filled with terrible poison made up of the king's anger over the people's disobedience. One drop of the poison would kill a strong man. The king told the prince to drink a whole cupful. If the prince would do that, his subjects would be healed and could come back to the park." Now the prince loved his father and his people, and even though his mission sounded very hard, he was determined to fulfill it. So he started on a journey to the city of man, and several of his friends went with him. On the way to the city, the prince stopped by a pond. The prince stared into the water, which was beautiful, calm, and blue. But as he continued to gaze into the water, in his mind, he saw a large cup, and he knew that it was the cup of poison that his father had commanded him to drink. The prince closed his eyes to get the picture of the awful cup out of his mind. For a moment, he thought about turning back, but he remembered his father's order. He had to go to the city of man. That was where the poison was. When the prince and his friends arrived in the city, they saw that it was a terrible place. Many of the homes were broken down and the people were unfriendly and suspicious. Somebody recognized the prince as the son of the king of life. And because they no longer loved the king, the people began to treat the prince quite badly. They shouted curses at him, they spat at him, and they taunted him. Some even tossed stones at him as he passed. The prince trembled in fear and began to sweat. He loved his father, but he couldn't help wondering if there's some other way for the people to be healed. He thought about the golden cup he was carrying, and he said to himself, "I wish that I didn't have to drink from this cup." He remembered the words of his father, "You must drink the cup." It's the only way to heal our people. More than anything else, the prince wanted to please the king. So right then and there, he decided that he would not turn back, but he would drink the poison just as his father had asked. The prince's friends also became very frightened at the angry mob of people around them, so that one by one they all ran away. And soon the prince was left all alone in the midst of the angry people. But still he kept looking for the fountain that was full of poison. Finally he entered a great plaza, and in the center was the fountain. And standing by the fountain was the king's arch-enemy, the one who had convinced the people to drink from the fountain in the park. And without saying a word, he took out the golden cup his father had given him and held it out to the man. With a cruel smile, the man filled the prince's cup. The angry people of the city all gathered around. The prince looked down at the poison that filled his cup. It was dark, murky, and smelly. He knew it would kill him. But as he looked around at the faces of the angry people, he remembered that their stony hearts would be healed if he drank it. He put his lips to the edge of the cup. The poison tasted bitter, but he had promised his father he would drink it all. The poison burned his throat, but he continued to swallow it. He finished it all, right down to the last sip. When the poison was all gone, the prince bowed his head, closed his eyes, and he died. He fell to the pavement beside the fountain. The man in the dark cloak laughed with glee because he thought he had killed the king's son, and all the people gave a great shout of triumph. But just then someone else entered the plaza. This person wore a cloak that was so bright no one could look at it, and as he walked, the ground trembled. The man in the dark cloak stopped laughing. He tried to shield his eyes from the brightness of the newcomer's cloak, but it was impossible. He began to run away, and as he ran, he screamed, "The King of Life has come! Run for your lives!" All the people fled, hiding themselves in the alleys and doorways around the plaza. The king stopped beside the body of the prince. Kneeling down, he touched his son. And when he touched him, the prince opened his eyes. The King of Life had brought the prince back from death. And at that very moment, the liquid bubbling up out of the fountain changed. No longer was it dark, murky poison. Now it was beautiful, clear, sweet water. The water itself seemed to be alive. The prince stood up and found the golden cup. He held it under the falling water and filled it to the brim. Then he turned to the people and held the cup out to them. "If anyone thirsts," he said, "let him come to me and drink." He called out, and the blowing wind seemed to carry his words throughout the plaza and among the people watching from the shadows. At that point, an amazing thing began to happen. The hearts of the people began to change, growing soft and warm once more. Oh, some people's hearts remained hard and cold, but all around the plaza, the hearts of men and women were changed. They were transformed. Slowly, fearfully, those whose hearts were changed began to approach the fountain. The prince and the water he offered looked so glorious, they could not hold back. Finally, one little boy approached the prince and timidly took the cup. Then he took a small sip and swallowed the water. The rest of the people watched anxiously, but nothing terrible happened. The boy simply looked up at the king and the prince with love and gratitude. He had been taught to hate them, but now all of that hate was gone. Seeing that nothing bad had happened to the boy, many other people quickly followed his example. They no longer wanted to run and hide from the king. Instead, they came to drink from the golden cup. And all of those who drank praised the king and the prince for healing them. They saw that the terrible poison the prince had drunk had healed their stony hearts. After that, the people joyfully began to visit the park once more, where they took great delight in walking with the King of Life and the Prince who had restored them to life. At this point, Grandpa leaned over to Ella and said to her, "Ella, I want you to remember that we get sick because of sin. That's why the medicine that makes our bodies well usually looks and tastes bad. But the prince had to drink something far more terrible so that his people might be healed from the results of their disobedience. So each time you have to take bitter medicine, I want you to remember the story of the prince's poison cup." "Oh, I will, Grandpa," Ella promised. "And you know what? I know another prince who died for his people." "Do you?" Grandpa asked with a twinkle in his eye.